So it's a little bit complicated, a little bit of complex. So that's why this potential device, the Acura, can actually fill that niche of making it a lot simpler device. So essentially, it's a handheld device, easily hold in your hand, gets quite good form factors, and it's designed specifically and only for neuraxial bony applications. It is not a device that you can use for looking, let's say, for IV access. And what makes this unique is that it has a overlay, a software overlay, so it's doing the pattern recognition for you and calculating the depth automatically. All right, so does it work? So I don't know if Mohammed Tarun's in the room. He was the first to look at this. This was in volunteers, where they looked at the Acura, looking at how good was it to detect epidural space compared to a ultrasound machine read by a radiologist, and it was pretty good, very high sensitivity and specificity. They also looked whether or not it could detect the spinous process, again, very high sensitivity and specificity, and also midline detection. So this was extremely encouraging results. And given this, we decided to try it out at Stanford. So Katie Seligman, I don't know if she's at SOAP, I'm not sure if she's in the audience. This was her project. She did all the scanning, which is important because she was an expert in it, and we wanted consistency, but it also potentially limits generalizability, but I'll discuss that further in a little while. We showed that we were able to, so we marked it off, and then the residents who were doing the block later had no idea what the depth was, and then we could compare them in a blinded fashion. The difference was minus 0.61. So remember I showed you that ultrasound is 0 to 0.8 centimeters, so it was in that same range of traditional ultrasound. And the good thing, it's minus, so it's going to tell you a little bit before you're going to get loss resistance. So that gives you a little bit of a safety margin. High degree of correlation. And we did not have a lot of obese patients, only about a third, and a handful with BMIs greater than 40. But you can see the mean bias on the Blant-Altman plot stays consistent throughout. Very high first-pass success. So that's all because we're going to trying to have time for questions, so I rushed through that. And Peter's going to come and talk to you about his study, which he did and was presented at ASA, and he's going to give you more details about his experience in a slightly bigger population that he has at Wake Forest. And I thank you for your time.
So these are the results, and we actually enrolled 62 subjects. Out of those 62 subjects, we randomized them into two groups, but 2 of them were actually excluded in the study because of protocol violation, and therefore we left behind 30 in the palpation group and 30 in the ultrasound group. And the demographics of these patients are basically similar in the age, BMI, and gestational age. The gravity and parity did show a statistical difference. However, we don't feel like the gravity and parity would have made a significant difference in terms of our primary or secondary outcome measures. Now, in terms of the primary outcome, we look at the time when you insert the spinal needle to the time you actually see CSF return. And we find out that the median time between the palpation and ultrasound group was statistically significant difference. We take 50 seconds for the ultrasound group to get CSF versus about 122 second median time to get CSF. And when we calculate the 95 confidence interval, you can see the two groups are actually not overlapping, which suggests that that difference are indeed existing there between the two groups, the differences. And when we look at the palpation time, and we did find that it was also different. The ultrasound takes actually a little bit longer than the palpation. Ultrasound takes median time is about 33 seconds versus the palpation group is about 23 seconds. So what we did is we include the palpation times or the scanning time to the time for the spinal fluid return, and the total time, that's what we call it, and it remained statistically significant different, meaning that the ultrasound group or the Accuro group was statistically shorter in terms of completing the procedure to see spinous fluid return. So in summary, then the ultrasound group tends to findings suggest that the time takes to find the CSF is shorter. It takes a little bit longer to do the scanning. However, the total time remains shorter with the ultrasound group. The pairs and the redirection are also less with use of the ultrasound. So these are the results from the experience from the patient side, and the verbal pain score was actually not different, but the satisfaction score was slightly better in the ultrasound group as compared to the palpation group. Thank you, and hope you all have a good meeting. And this is my daughter, youngest daughter, and I'm glad to tell you, and also my wife, I'm glad that I did not name her Tinkerbell, but actually we named her horse Tinkerbell though.
Okay. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about practical tips on, how do you use Accuro to actually augment your skills. We've heard some great research backgrounds. I do want to say I met Will back in probably about 6, 7 years ago, something like that, when you first started developing this device as a graduate student. So I feel, I am collecting an honorarium, but I do feel like this is a really good company. I've seen it for a long time, and I do feel like their interest is really in preventing patient harm and helping us do a better job for our patients as well. Second patient, and I know we're short on time, I'm trying to just go through this really quickly, is a woman who had an induction for labor for IUGR, somebody who really wanted to have a good working epidural because of potential for needing to go back for a cesarean delivery. She had unilateral coverage from her epidural that was placed a couple hours ago. And when I looked at the procedure note, it didn't really mention anything about scoliosis, but she was having some need for us to go and replace, so we went in. And so this is what I saw. Again, it sort of looks similar to the last patient, and as you can see down here is where her former epidural was placed. And so essentially what I did, the same kind of thing, so this is sort of my exam. You see more prominence over here, not so much down here, so it's kind of like also which way is this curve going to go. So when we looked, again, it's hard to tell in this picture, but we had quite of a similar degree of curve to the last patient in the lumbar spine. And in fact, the needle, this was a first pass attempt by a CA1 resident who was able to quickly get this patient comfortable, and her epidural worked very well from this on. So I feel like this is so I guess my recipe for doing this is I usually take these steps when trying to calibrate myself. So I think level really matters. We heard a lot about that in the Gertie Mark sessions today, how if we're going in, we're often, and from these sessions here too, we're often much higher than we think we are. I feel like after using this, I am more likely to be L4-5, probably about 80% of the time. I'm right at L4-5 when I guess. And another, in those extra times, I'm usually one level higher. And so instead of being widely off each time. So I look for the sacral triangle, and then I calibrate myself, estimating, and then check it. And then I also look for these subtle signs of scoliosis, which I feel like more and more, I feel like all of my patients are starting to have rotation in their lumbar spines, which is really interesting. Most of the time, I don't usually have to change my angle, but sometimes I'm surprised. And then I basically confirm all of this with ultrasound. So I try to quiz myself up front and then confirm it later. And I feel like this has really helped me be more accurate at sort of guessing that somebody's going to need a little bit more time or a little bit more expertise or the ultrasound to be able to place their epidural. So for that, I would say, don't forget to stop at the booth 16, to start scanning yourself. And I think we're going to go ahead and take some questions now.
Thank you for the presentation. I am a CRNA that I work in Kentucky. My name is Cheryl Parker, and we have an exclusive OB anesthesia service. And if anybody in here knows anything about Kentucky, we have a very large BMI population of patients, and I want to thank Will and the makers of this device because we have seen incredible success rates with first-time pass, in a training environment with BMIs as high as 73. So it's been a wonderful device for both for teaching and patient satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah. Hi, Josh Younger from Henry Ford in Detroit. Quick question. We have actually the luxury on our labor and delivery to actually have an ultrasound present at full time. Do you find that there's an advantage to this device over traditional ultrasound? And if so, what is that besides its compactability?
The major one is it's so easy. So we've got it. You saw our big ultrasound, the console, and you're clanking it in, and we can't stand bringing it into the room, and it's a big barrier to use. This you just pick up and you walk in, have in your pocket, and just take it out if you need it. So that is a huge factor that we found influences use.
Yeah, I was going to say, for us too, the 3D mapping image below helps you. Like I said, I use it for a lot of midline rotation, rotational correction, and so I think it does help residents learn the anatomy a little bit better in scoliosis and be able to anticipate in the future, and that's an advantage over the regular ultrasound.